Hey, Micah. It's great to do our product roundup again.
Yeah, nice to see you, Justin. Happy October. In celebration of the full moon yesterday, I've got my full moon shirt.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay, little moon story since we're on it. I spend a lot of time on the water, and we're here in Washington in an area that's highly affected by tides. And so all the time I'm like, where's the tide going or coming? And of course, it's highly affected by the moon and the sun. But I always think about the tide as a moon wave because it's like sucking the water around the earth, and you get this like rise and fall very slow, 6-7 hours. So happy moon wave.
Yeah, I like it.
Good.
That's great.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I'm sorry that I missed our last roundup. I know Stephanie filled in, talked about CMMC and all the awesome work that she's been doing there to help our customers meet the DoD's requirements. But what I'm excited to show you today, Justin, is the improvements we've made recently to our risk management feature set. Is that cool?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And risk is interesting. Like when you and I started on this product 5-6 years ago, I felt like risk was the most tortured part of our data model around GRC, right? Like it's like so amorphous at times. People use it to kind of lord over opportunity. And I always thought of it, just kind of as like something we need to kind of have in the platform, but something that wasn't as pragmatic as I wanted in the other features. But we've come full circle now. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And most, if not all, information security compliance programs require some kind of risk assessment. They differ depending on which program you're doing, the level of rigor required. But we've been spending some time trying to improve our risk management features and continue to move them, ahead. We've got big plans, of course, for the coming months to start to layer in some AI analysis and other things there, of course, as Verify AI and Security Assistant start to get more and more embedded in our platform here. But let me show you the couple of things that we've added just recently to help continue to round out our risk management feature set. So the first thing that I want to show is we've added a new capability. We're calling it the advanced risk scoring methodology. And what this is doing is using NIST's 5-point matrix scoring rubric. This is valid for any of the NIST frameworks as well as ISO frameworks, SOC 2 frameworks. And so customers have access to turn this on if they would like to just click the enabled button pretty quick, and then you can start using this different methodology moving forward. So our risk management feature for folks who maybe haven't dug super deep into it, it allows you to keep here a risk register of all of the risks that your company might encounter as you're going about your business and everything. We do pre-install and predefine risks for you. So there are some templates that get installed in here. But of course, you can add your own custom risks. You can edit all of the risks. Just like everywhere else in the StrikeGraph platform, the risk management functionality is very flexible and can really bend and shift to meet the needs of whatever it is that you have going on in your business.
Mm. Yeah.
I'm going to pull up one of these risks here. Let's take a look at change management. This is a good, easy one to talk through. So, like risks, like other areas in the product, risks have a name, a description. But what's exciting is that you can go ahead and start to score and mitigate these risks directly in StrikeGraph here. So I'm just going to pop open the scoring modal here. And now with the matrix, the NIST 8 or the NIST 5-point methodology for scoring risks here, you can see under likelihood and impact, we now have many more options, and this will kind of calculate whatever the combined score is based off of risk or NIST's scoring rubric. It is not a straight plus minus scoring methodology. NIST has something a little bit more complex that's kind of graded on a curve. So you'll see here, a high plus a moderate equals a moderate, rather than you might expect it to be something like a high moderate, or, even if we switch it to very high, it stays moderate here as well. So there's some details under the hood, of course, that we can dig into at another time, or if anyone's curious, we've got help articles about how the scoring methodology actually works. But then the other thing you get to do is select a treatment here. And, most of the time, folks will be developing security controls for mitigating their risks, right? So that's the most common treatment option here. Of course, you do have the choice to designate that you want to transfer this risk to a third party. You could always discontinue the activities described in the risk if you either recognize that it's way too risky or there's no way to, potentially control the risk, or you could just accept the risk too. If it's a low risk and it's likely not going to happen and the impact is, pretty minimal, you might just accept that as part of doing business, depending on what your situation is. So, you can score the risk there. Of course, that'll update the risk register. And then you get to go through and activate controls, review controls to ensure that you have the accurate or sort of enough coverage to mitigate the risk appropriately. Once you finish that activity, you can click the mitigate risk button. Everything will pop up here. But now you might notice that the risk is still marked as needs attention. And so this is one of the new features that we have added into the platform over the last couple of weeks. We call this the risk needs attention status, and it mimics the other statuses in the StrikeGraph platform for evidence and controls, where if there's something, that's amiss about your risk, we'll flag it for you so that you know that you have to dig into there. There might be some more work to do. You might need to re-review some of the controls associated to it. And so I want to show a couple different items here. So here we can look at the acceptable use of company asset risk. This one is, in a green active status. And I want to talk about why. So one is we have a risk owner assigned. This is a surprisingly small detail, but really critical to ensure that your risk is being properly monitored, right? You need to know who is responsible for ensuring that this risk is, being watched, that the right controls are in place, all of those kind of things. So that's one of the first things, of course, that rolls up into the risk status there.
I think about a risk owner commonly being like an executive at an organization or a high level leader, depending on the size of the org.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's spot on. It might be the CEO, it could be the CTO, it could be the CFO, it could be a director, a VP of compliance. Again, it'll really depend on the risk that you've got. Of course, the next item is whether or not it's scored, which this one is. So, that's great, easy. And then whether or not it's been marked as mitigated. So, again, of course, the mitigation techniques might be different depending on what your treatment choice is. But once the risk is mitigated, that'll contribute to its satisfied status.
Yeah. Now, one of the things on the scoring side that I love about this likelihood and impact, we could look at this one and be like, this is likely to happen. It's very large opportunity to happen and that a lot of data gets shipped around, but perhaps we put inside these controls. So the impact or the amount of data that can be shared is really locked down because very sensitive information is stored in very locked down systems. We've got those controls put in place.
Yeah, exactly. So the most interesting thing, though, that rolls up into that needs attention status is the status of your controls, right? And this is where that intelligence really starts to come into play, because especially if your treatment is developing security controls, this risk is only actually mitigated if those controls are continuously monitored, evidence is being automatically collected, and everything with those evidence and control items are in good standing. So if we take a look at this acceptable use of company asset risk, we've identified already it's in good standing. We can take a look at the controls and we can see it's got 3 active controls. They're all in place. They're all also in good standing. And so, again, that makes sense as to why this risk is satisfied and in a good place. What we can look at is this antivirus item here. And, similarly, it's in good standing. It's got a risk owner. It's been scored. It's got a good treatment. It's been mitigated. It's got a control that's active and in place. But let's simulate what might happen if new evidence arises and, everything kind of is triggered into a needs attention status. So here I've drilled down into one of the evidence items that satisfies the control that mitigates the risk. You can start to see the chain, that moves upstream there. And this evidence is asking for configuration settings of the server to ensure that they are set up with some level of antivirus configuration.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some satisfied evidence right here. If we pop this open, we'll see this is a dump out of one of our systems that talks about what the server is, where the IP is, and whether or not antivirus is enabled and, kind of what it is. If we imagine that I collect this a second time, and the new piece of evidence, whether this is coming from an automated collection or a manual screenshot or some other method of collection, we're going to let Verify AI run through this, but Verify AI is going to flag that this is different from the one that was included before, right? And we can pop this open, we can take a look at it, and we can see that now some of these items are saying that antivirus solutions are not installed, right? So this will, once Verify is done reviewing it, it'll flag this as a needs attention evidence. So what we can expect then is that when this evidence item needs attention, that means the control that it is working to satisfy is also not in good standing. So that's going to flip into needs attention. And then that, of course, rolls up to the risk that it's working to mitigate. And so that risk will then be marked as need attention.
Yeah, I was doing a little research on the risk space as we were looking at this particular feature set. It has its own set of wonkiness around risk and some of the terms. And one of the terms that I thought was interesting is that, like, what we're looking at here is a risk exposure, right? Because we've got certain risks that we've looked at, and we've set up controls for them, and we've collected evidence, and so we understand where a risk exposure is. But Verify AI just tested that evidence that changed the risk exposure.
Right. And we can kind of see the impact of that. So antivirus was flagged. If we switch over to controls, we can see now that this control also needs attention, up here, because it's got an evidence item that needs attention. And then we can pop over to the antivirus risk, and we can see now this, was previously satisfied, but now it also needs attention. So this is an exposed area, to your point, right? Previously, our risk around antivirus was well mitigated. It had a control that had satisfied evidence, but now that there's an issue, it's rolled up, and that exposure is being demonstrated here. So again, it's a really great way to kind of keep track of your risk posture, right? You don't want to be exposed on any more risks than absolutely necessary.
I mean, I think this is one of my complaints about risk practices broadly. When we first started implementing StrikeGraph, one of the things we thought that risk was useful for was scoping the right security or operational practices. Like, what are my controls? And we loved going through a risk assessment and getting a team to say, what's the impact or likelihood that this risk could be realized? What controls do we want to operate to properly mitigate it? And so that was great. And when we first set up ourselves on our own platform, the first thing I did in what is our security posture is I went through the risk assessment, I scored them, and I activated controls that I wanted to use to mitigate the risk. But we didn't have that full circle, right? And now what I love about this is you're like, if I'm talking to my board, I'm doing an annual risk assessment with the board, or we have a compliance committee review, or even with the CISO, like I'm checking in with my CISO once a month, we could pull up that risk report and say, what's our current risk exposure day to day? Right. Really understanding what's happening on the ground with the validation of our operational practices.
You touched on, I think, the really important thing there. This is, as close to real time as we can really get, right? The moment that evidence is identified as no longer satisfied, the risk is also updated, right? And it flags it immediately for you. So no longer are you waiting until your annual risk review to identify that you have some level of exposure. This is now happening, in real time continuously. So on those daily, weekly, monthly meetings that you have with your CISO, you can actually review your current risk status, not just the scores from 6 months ago, but where you're at today. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that is really, I've been talking a lot with our team about, what the concept of AI native means and how we've been building our platform, around an intelligence layer, something you and I talked about really early on. And what I'm just ecstatic about, when we look at these types of things is our model for operational or security, from a horizontal perspective across an organization, just continues to hold up in really effective ways. We built that risk feature ages ago in our company lifecycle. And we then drilled down through how that drives an impact, but then back up the chain to how to now measure in a really effective way. And certainly it took time to get the up down to work, but now it's meaningful. Like it's saying something that is meaningful about the current state of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking of AI, right, I want to show off another feature. I think we've talked about this, but it's an area that we're continuing to explore and innovate in. And this is really starting from the control and identifying what evidence is necessary to satisfy that control. So we call it the evidence coverage analysis right now, and we've got it run already for the acceptable use policy. I don't want to have to sit here and have you watch the loading screen like we did for Verify AI just a second ago. But essentially what this, if we take a look at this acceptable use policy, we can see, it's got some evidence. Only one of them is active at the moment, though. So it's like, it's being satisfied, but not super deeply. It's mapped up to these 3 different criteria, satisfying requirements from NIST as well as SOC 2. And so, on the surface, of course, this is fine, right? We would pass an audit with this control in place and the evidence that we've collected, but it doesn't necessarily give a full picture as to, what the acceptable use policy should have, like whether there's other opportunities for monitoring, how you're complying with this control. And so that's where we built this evidence coverage analysis. And so, what this is doing is taking input from the criteria, from those frameworks that this control is working to satisfy. It's also taking the control description itself. So if we had written a different control here, it would be context aware around that. And it's taking information about the systems that we use in order to identify where we might not have enough evidence of compliance with this control, right? So I've already given StrikeGraph my system description. It's extracted out all the different systems that we use. It's storing that in our knowledge base. And now it's using that information to help me refine the evidence that we're collecting to demonstrate that this control is working and satisfied. So in some areas, we're doing good. It's identified 10 different themes that we might want to cover in terms of the evidence that we're collecting. Social media and AI guidelines, it looks like we're doing good here. Our acceptable use policy covers these items. Same thing with how we can use information. That's looking pretty good. But there are a couple other areas where it looks like we could further strengthen the evidence that we are collecting. One that I'll pop into here, this is the security roles and responsibility themes. And so Verify AI is looking to ensure that the policy or a policy clearly outlines security-related responsibility, enforcement roles, and accountability for information security. So it's saying it wasn't able to find that in our acceptable use policy. That's probably okay. It's not always in the acceptable use policy. Oftentimes that's in, a different type of document or different type of policy. And here Security Assistant has popped in to offer a recommendation on how we might mitigate this concern that Verify AI has identified, right, of a lack of evidence around a certain security roles and responsibility. Security Assistant is recommending adding a new piece of evidence, which is awesome. And it's pre-written the evidence for us, which is also awesome. So here, it's describing the evidence and the description. And, I can just with one button click and create this evidence. And now it is mapped up to the control here. So we can now scroll down, take a look at the evidence, and here, this is the evidence right here that Security Assistant just created. One click, I've now got more evidence that I can upload my information security role and responsibility, whether it's from the acceptable use policy or not. And of course, I can come in and edit this. So if Security Assistant was mostly right, but potentially missed a detail or two, I can refine that. I can assign an owner, and then I can supply that evidence. And I've got one more checkpoint to ensure that that control is properly satisfied, which of course ensures that the risk that it is mapped to is properly mitigated and that we don't have any unneeded exposure when it comes to risks.
Yeah. Micah, you must feel like the pace of our AI features is accelerating. Like you have enough foundational elements pulled together, the agentic platform that we use, that our data model and also the machine learning driven models are really accelerating feature development for us as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 2 or 3 different features in the works right now that I'll be really excited to show off probably at our next Roundup. And, we've been selected to work with some of the pretty big tech companies out there to build some hyper refined models to really do sort of bespoke tasks. And I'm really excited about that too. It's going to give us the opportunity to better clarify what our AI systems are able to do for our customers, and really just continue to embed AI into our product in a way that, isn't trying to replace any security jobs necessarily, or audits, or, the importance of human audits, but it's designed to give you that real-time visibility into your compliance posture, the security you have in place for your customers, whether or not the data privacy is accurate, all of the really important things that should be continuously and constantly monitored. And so I'm just super excited. We've got a great team of engineers working on all these features, and we'll just continue to show it off as we roll it out.
I think, we certainly, AI broadly has been a big marketing phrase. It's funny. I was at the National Cyber Summit a couple of weeks ago and talking with some of the attendees, and they were like, yeah, if you would have come here last year, you wouldn't have seen AI. But this year's everybody's moniker just says this plus AI. But, it's one thing to bolt on a large language model, onto your product somewhere. That's a security risk in my mind. We, of course, host all the models that we utilize inside our own environment. But the other thing is that these things are supposed to solve problems, not just write text. And if you don't start from a place of understanding the information space you're operating in, the problems that are in that information space, like compliance, and then where different tool sets create a feature that's powerful, you really miss the opportunity to improve your software and your customers' lives. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know these generative AI models, as much as they're called generative AI, can do so much more than just write text for you.
No, right. Yeah.
So I'm excited that we're using it in, more intelligent ways, and just really pumped to continue the innovation we've got going around that.
All right. Any teasers for next time? I think we dropped a couple of hints.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to spoil it too much, but yeah.
Super exciting. Stoked to share this demo of these features, and also want to just thank our customers and those people that work with us, because a lot of what we saw here today came from feedback of your team working directly with customers and some of what their challenges were. And so we're very grateful for how we align our product roadmap with some of the challenges our users and customers are having.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Justin. Well, great to chat as always.
Thanks, Micah.